Yes. So session 5, which many of you were just here listening to, we heard a lot about sustainability and green chemistry approaches. And, you know, an underlying theme of that being that chemicals are in our environment to serve numerous purposes, and that there are a number of approaches that can be taken to meet those needs in ways that are perhaps safer, perhaps more sustainable, better for the environment. So we've heard first from Trish Castriano at NIEHS, who has a problem that many of us have, which is the running of a very large research institution that has issues about sustainability that I would hazard a guess we have for any large building that people are working in, having to do with heating and cooling and all of that. But also have some specific issues, which is all these Waldos around doing experiments. And I love that analogy, by the way. I've got a copy of Where's Waldo on my bookshelf at work. And that these individuals, it has not been inculcated in them necessarily that the choices that they're making about use of materials make a difference for the environment. And I think that was a theme that was repeated among others as well. Quite a challenge in terms of the researchers. Stephanie Jordan from Johnson & Johnson gave us the perspective of a very large consumer company, consumer products company that I would guess also has the challenge of having an extremely recognizable brand globally that it needs to be very zealous about guarding, I would guess. And it was very interesting to hear about a number of approaches that have been taken by J&J. In particular, I found it intriguing that J&J actually undertakes fairly deep internal assessments of hazard and risks and assessments of efficacy and safety, rather than simply adopting lists, and that it's also has on the other hand some other projects where perhaps some of these other issues such as what's on lists might also be taken into consideration. And it sounded as if though J&J is motivated both by a corporate ethic about wanting to decrease risk, as well as being very forward-thinking about where are things going, with how different things might be regulated in the future, and wanting to be out ahead of that train. And they were the first to bring up the issue of the importance of informed substitution, which I thought was a recurrent theme, of not wanting to just substitute without having full information about the implications across the life cycle of the chemical. We then heard from Connie DeFord, another kind of company, a global chemicals company that is really at the forefront globally of producing not only chemicals but also chemically derived products at great quantity, and also was obviously capable of developing its own analyses, its own assessments against a sustainable chemistry index that sounded like it was a very interesting way of approaching the problem, of making decisions. They also seem to be attempting to not only strengthen the safety of products, but increase the disclosure of ingredients. And then we heard about some case studies about some specific products where they were attempting to make the products greener, either because of existing regulation, or in one case it seemed to me the potential of new regulatory efforts in the future. And there I'm thinking about the nonylphenol phenol ethoxylates, which I'm sure many of us would think at some time will probably be more stringently regulated. We heard from David Constable about the American Chemical Society and its efforts to bring people together in sectors in order to work on this problem. The sectors being the chemical producers, pharmacologists, pharmacological manufacturers, and formulators. And it seemed to be that that sector-based strategy is a very effective way of doing that work. And Dr. Constable really emphasized some of the same problems, actually, that we heard about from the NIEHS in terms of the way that chemists have not traditionally approached their work around these issues, and that, in fact, have traditionally preferred many of the very reactive compounds that are the most likely to be involved with toxicity or ecological problems down the line. Then we had two interesting presentations from people who were involved in trying to somehow promote either clean production, in one case Beverly Thorpe from the Clean Production Action Network, or reduction of toxics from Liz Harriman. Bev Thorpe gave us a very interesting set of contrasts about two approaches that they're taking. I mean, one that sounded to me like it was more like an end-of-pipe approach, a SIN list, and a list of things that have already been identified as being, potential bad actors through the EU REACH process. Also a very creative way of using a government process, although one that I'm sure is not without controversy in Europe. And on the other hand, the green screen, which is building from the base up in terms of trying to set benchmarks for what would be preferable, and that anything could kind of meet that. Which I thought was kind of a nice contrast in opposites, either trying to avoid the sinless things or try to go for the preferable products. And then from Liz Harriman on the toxic use reduction program at UMass Lowell, which is truly a unique partnership between a university and numerous other players in this space. I think they've really been pioneers in terms of bringing academic science to bear, in this area. And some interesting cases with some known bad actors, perchloroethylene and hexavalent chromium. And then last but not least, Joe David, who works in Seattle on real estate development, talked about the concerns that they've had about the toxics in that region, the fact that the choice about materials for building across many buildings, I would imagine, in that highly urbanized environment could be impacting those resources, and their determination to make a building that would not contribute to that problem. And it was interesting to hear about the efforts that they had to undertake just in order to obtain the information that they needed in order to determine which products would be healthier. So in summary, I would say that what we learned is that there are many drivers for reducing the risk of chemicals, that some of them had to do with reducing costs, some reducing risk, but some with what I think Constable called the intangibles in terms of the reputation of the products, the reputation of companies, that everybody seemed to feel that a life cycle approach was very important, that if you're just working at the end of pipe, you can miss things that are important. And I certainly learned some things that were surprising to me, like, think about a process like distillation and just how a process like that, or a choice of catalyst, and how, a choice of a whole class of catalysts could change how mining is done and the impacts on the environment of the mining. I thought that those were very intriguing points. Information as a driver and an enabler, that seemed to be a very important point, as well as the lack of information about a lot of things, and the fact that we have lists that rely on existing information and assessments that have been done. But I kept feeling again and again that we look under the same lamppost where the light's been shown for years, and the substances that have been tested again and again and measured again and again, and there's so many other substances that we know so little about, we can't even factor them into these kinds of voluntary assessments. The importance of informed substitution, not substituting a known for something that's unknown that might be worse, because we just don't know. And then the importance of educating or working with the chemists themselves, the organic and analytic chemists, who at the end of the day may be at the very base of how some of these decisions are fundamentally made. I do know that in the case of government scientists, who I've worked a lot with, and Megan Latshaw's here, she works a lot with them as well, that the decisions that they make about how methods are done can have enormous implications. If an analytic method needs a ton of methylene chloride and the government agency says that's how it should be done, that is going to drive that across not only our country but also other countries. How a reformed TSCA could better support these efforts, I think, it's an intriguing point, but it does seem that some of the things that EPA has been doing, like Design for Environment and their green certification programs, have helped to fuel some of these green chemistry efforts in the private sector, and that somehow EPA needs to continue to be in that space. But on the other hand, if a TSCA actually generated more information about chemicals, that fundamentally even would be a better driver in terms of empowering the decision making. And even though, as many said in the discussion, it may well be that it's not that people would want the detailed toxicological information. They just might want to know if it's a red, a yellow, or a green. So thank you very much for asking me to summarize.